All right, so it is 1:05 now. So to introduce myself, I am Dylan Cooper. A professor and associate professor in management. Um, the class I definitely used at WMC the most for is that Management 307, which is a required business major class, um, mostly juniors. Also has some IT and some other people in it. Um, that class I generally use 3 to 5 cases in that. But cases are used in the business school quite a bit. I know, for example, the business ethics class, which is Management 326, which is also a required business class, uses cases related to doing ethical things at work or not doing ethical things at work, as the case may be. Um, the marketing class uses cases. I think Capstone uses cases, I'm not sure. I use cases in most of the MBA classes use cases. Do the MBA students use the WMC as well? Do they come to you guys? Masters of Business Administration?
They are welcome to, but I don't know that we have a lot that come in.
Okay. Well, they use cases in I think most of their classes. So they're used pretty widely in MVS Business School. They're also used in business schools like worldwide. It's a thing that Harvard started decades ago, and other business schools have picked up a lot. What business cases are stories about something that happens in an organization. And it could be a for-profit, it could be a not-for-profit, it could be a governmental organization, could be, a church, it could be really any kind of organization. Usually it's businesses, but pretty frequently it's also nonprofits. They take place across the world, because they're written mostly by professors in business schools all over the world. So like they take place not just in the United States. And so they're a story about some situation at work. And they tend to be told like there's a main character, although not always, and sort of walking through what happened at this business. And the overall point of cases is to help students understand the concepts we talk about in class better by using them to understand something that's a real life, sort of like close to a real life situation. I mean, they're reading a story, so it's not experiencing it firsthand, but the stories are usually things that have actually happened in organizations. They might be masked, in which case the names have changed and the details have changed enough to hide which company it is. And sometimes it's like straight up just a company talking about what happened at that exact company. Some of them are called dilemma cases. That's the kind that I mostly use. And that's where it builds up to like a big decision that needs to be made. And then the case ends. And the point is then the student has to say what should be done. And then the other are more descriptive cases where they say like what actually happened. So it says, this was the situation, this is what people did, and this is how it came out. What else about them? They can be like any length. Like there's super short cases that are like a page long or less. And then there's cases that are like 50 pages long. The ones I use in my Management 307 class tend to be like 4 or 5 pages long. From the Harvard Business Review publishes these short cases, they call them. The long ones tend to have not just text, but also like numbers and charts and graphs and stuff like that. So people can be like looking at like sales trends over the last 10 years while they're reading the case to understand the details better. Those longer ones tend to get used more in MBA classes and less in undergraduate. You get cases from all sorts of different places. Harvard Business Publishing has probably the best set of cases. Sage has a big database of cases. The Case Center is another place that has a lot of cases. And we have access, I think, to all of these through the library. Cases typically cost the student about $5 to buy a case. Sometimes you can get free cases. Some of them get published free. There's some journals that publish cases that you can get free. The Harvard Business Review ones, the library has a subscription, an online subscription to Harvard Business Review, and the cases are published in the Harvard Business Review. So students can just go look up those cases in the Harvard Business Review and get it for free. They can also buy them from Harvard Business Publishing. So because of the ways that the copyrights work, professors are almost never allowed to take the cases and stick them into Canvas. So we end up telling the students, you got to go to Harvard Business Reviews. You either got to go look up in Harvard Business Review in the library, or you got to go to the Harvard Business Publishing's website, make an account, and buy it. Those are the main ways. Some of them, the only way to get it is to buy it. And students, depending on how much they're pressed for time versus wanting to save money, will either go to the library and look it up or just pay for it. And as I said, they tend to be $5 or $4.50, $4.95, something like that. So that's what cases are. And again, the big point of them is to help people better understand the concepts from class by thinking through how those cases apply in real world situations. That being said, that main point is the same for everybody, but how professors use them can be very different. So the details of what I ask for in a case analysis are different than what the details that Brendan asked for in his business ethics class. So if you've helped somebody with like my cases, don't assume you got to go look at the prompt because they're going to be quite a bit different. But again, we're always asking apply cases, concepts from class to the case, no matter what the actual details of the instructions are. So I thought I'd give you a little example using this una mano case that at least Sohi is familiar with. Has any of you helped anybody with the una mano case? Or you guys all knew? You all knew? Okay, so this is a case. It's a Harvard Business Review case. It's like 4 or 5 pages long. It's pretty old at this point. And the story is this woman, Helena, is the co-founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Unamano. And their mission is to help entrepreneurs in emerging countries. And so they set up an office in that country, and they do a lot of work connecting people who are ready to start a business with mentors and sources of funding and stuff like that. So that's what Unamano does. And then in the story, the other co-founder comes up with the idea that they should open a branch office in Miami. And Miami's in the United States. They haven't had any branch offices in the United States before. The United States is like the biggest example of a developed economy. So it's obviously not an emerging country. And so the case is about essentially deciding what they should do. Should they open a office in Miami or not? And I give my class this near the beginning of the semester, and we will have just talked about a concept in management called organizational mission statements. And what organizational mission statements are short statements that say what the company does, the purpose of why this company or nonprofit exists, how it helps make the world a better place or make the shareholders money or whatever it is. And so in the Uno Mano example, it was helping entrepreneurs in emerging countries. And so an example of applying this concept to the case would be like just right there, super clear, opening in Miami goes against the mission statement because the mission statement says emerging countries, US is not an emerging country. But that doesn't get you very far because when we learn concepts in class, you think of any class, doesn't matter if you're a business major or not, there's always details, right, about these concepts. So like one of the details about mission statements is that they help companies or other organizations make strategic decisions. And so deciding whether to open a new office in a new country would be a strategic decision for Uno Mano. And so we can use this detail of knowing about what mission statements are for to say, well, it's supposed to guide strategic decisions. If we opened in Miami, we wouldn't be using it to help guide that decision. Another concept we learn in class is that organizations that follow their mission statements, and there's more details, but I'm glossing over for here, follow their mission statements are more successful. So if they're a for-profit company, they make more money. If they're a nonprofit, they serve their clientele better or more of them or something along those lines. And so once again, if we take that detail of the idea of mission statements and apply it to Uno Mano's case, we see like that would maybe be another argument against not moving to Miami because companies that follow their mission statements do better, and going to Miami wouldn't be following their mission statement. But then we also learn when we're talking about mission statements that companies sometimes change their mission statements, that there's legitimate reasons for why you might want to change your mission statement. And it might be, for example, the company has grown beyond its mission statement. So the example we use in class is Google's original mission statement was creating the perfect search engine. And they changed it to something more general that I can't remember off the top of my head, because basically they were doing all this other stuff that was important. And so they wanted a new mission statement that made sense with all this other stuff they wanted to do as well. Like, providing internet service in rural Africa and things like that, or creating Google Maps, all these different things like that. So we learn that in the class that you might want to change your mission statement. And so you use that detail to say, well, it looks like going against your mission statement might be a bad idea, but you can change your mission statement. And so that would be an example of using some of the details of a concept you learn in class to better understand a case. So is that, any questions actually? Questions about how that works? So that's the basic idea of case analysis assignments, is to get students to use concepts and ideas that we've talked about in class in the details of them to better understand something that's similar to something they might encounter in the real world. And if you think about it, like all the concepts you learn in class, doesn't matter what your major is, unless it's maybe nursing, are generic concepts that don't really, they're sort of abstract. And you have to figure out how to apply them to the real world before they're actually useful to you. Even like knowing algebra is not useful until you know, like, oh, I can figure out how much this thing would cost me if I used algebra to do it, right? So everything we learn in class is these abstract ideas that aren't real until we can apply them to something. So that's what the cases are doing. The other thing that pretty much every case analysis assignment does is ask the person's opinion on what they should do, or whether that actually happened was the best decision, or something like that. Because remember, some cases say this is what what the situation was, this is what people did, and this is what happened. But there always tend to be these open-ended questions where there's not a 100% right answer. And so with these dilemma cases, like I tend to use in my Management 07 class, I'm asking them to say like what you would do. But some of these other ones, you could be like, well, this is what happened. How do you think they could have improved what they did? Or why did what they did lead to this outcome and instead of this other outcome? Something like that. Their opinion about what would have been the best thing to do. And so this, again, means you got to use the concepts that you've just used to understand the case better to draw some conclusions. So you'd be like, well, I think they should change the mission statement to help entrepreneurs in cities around the world or something like that. And then you'd have to just use the concepts of mission statements. And there'd be some other concepts that we talk about in class, like stakeholders. Those are people who have some interest in the company in some way, and see why that would be the best solution using the details of those concepts. Or if I was analyzing an outcome of a case that they already told me what happened, I could be like using, say, that stakeholders idea again of groups of people who care about what happens with the company. Be like, well, that worked out really good for this stakeholder group, and it worked out really good for the employees and management, but not so great for the customers and the suppliers. And so that would be, once again, using the concept of stakeholders, identifying the different stakeholders that care about this company and how the decision impacted each of them. Is that making sense? Do you have any questions about that? All right. So cases are pretty much always asking you to apply the concepts and then give an opinion about either what you should do or what happened, something along those lines. And so everything I set up to now would apply to any professor. I'm going to talk now about the things that I'm looking for in particular. And most time other professors are looking for this as well, but you would need to double check with them or with the prompt or whatever to be sure. And so the first thing I'm looking for is just good use of the concepts, by which I mean, are they using them accurately? Do they actually know what the concept means? Because you can probably think of classes you've had where the name of something that you learned was different, sounded different than what it actually was. So sometimes you'll have students who are just going off the name of it rather than actually knowing what the concept is. So using it accurately. Another thing is using the details of it, which was what I just gave that example with Uno Mano, is these details of, because if you just know what the concept is, but you don't know all this information that's been found out about the concept, you're not really taking advantage of that knowledge. So I'm looking for good uses of concepts. And then because this is a place where I'm asking them to make a decision, I'm looking for good decision-making processes. So I'm looking for things like not making up their mind before they've collected all the facts and looking at both sides of the issue and identifying weaknesses in their plan and saying how they can get around those weaknesses. Things like that is what I'm looking at with the good decision making. Because part of, like, if you think about it, I'm teaching management. A lot of management is making decisions. And so if you want to make good decisions, you need to follow a good process. I mean, sometimes you make a good decision on accident. Sometimes a good process leads to a bad decision. But the more you stick with a good process, the more likely you are to have a good decision. And then the last thing I'm looking at is either good business writing or good presentation, because I allow them to either write it or make a video of a presentation in your guys' room. I forget what it's called, but the room where you guys have all that equipment. Um, and so I'm looking for good communication, essentially. Um, I'm going to start with talking about business writing because you're WMC, and I think you probably do more with writing than anything else. And business writing, like I never took any business classes when I was an undergraduate. I did take a lot of creative writing classes. I took a lot of comparative literature classes. I took a lot of English classes, but I didn't take any business classes. And when I got to business, I was like, what is this awful writing that people are using? Um, and what it is this very different intention. Intention of business writing, most of the time, is to get an idea across as clearly as possible to people whose time is pressed. So like the subtler points that you might make in an English essay would just go over the head of somebody who's reading a business document because they're just reading it fast, most of the time. It's also not really trying to invoke emotions. I mean, sometimes it is, like if you're writing ads, obviously then that place is trying to, and it's not really trying to tell people how you feel about something, unless that's relevant to some business situation you're trying to decide. So most of the time, it's you've got some ideas in your head and you're trying to get them as clearly as possible across to somebody else, whoever reads your thing. And so like using section headings is really common. Putting in, white space just to break things up. So it's really clear if somebody's just like, oh, the only thing I care about is the suggestion. And they can just skip right down to that section. Or the only thing I care about is the summary, and they skip right to that. So that's one of the things that I work on in my class is, are you getting your ideas across clearly? One of the things, which also leads me into grammar, more than well, if you guys have already done tutoring, not more than you'd think. If you haven't done tutoring, more than you would think, um, with things like, you know, run-on sentences, sentence fragments, things like that, where it just interferes with being clear about what exactly the person means. Um, and so that's something that in my class, the students freak out about a little bit because I have a reputation of beating on them about grammar. I have what I call the strict grammar policy, which is actually the lenient grammar policy, but I call it strict to make them freak out about it a little bit. And it's worked. And especially going to WMC has worked. Um, the level of just the technical quality of the writing has gone up a lot once they started seeing people in the WMC and getting worried about it. So the thing about business writing is you're really looking for clarity. Bullet points are fine as long as they're used well. Bullet points are good because then if you're just somebody reading something fast, you're like, oh, there's that list I was looking for, and you just read it. Quick, done. Um, with oral presentations, it's sort of the same thing. You're just trying to be clear. You're just trying to make your points and get them across. It helps to have, slides. I think I require slides or some kind of visuals that like reinforce the points that you're speaking. So I'm looking for good business writing, and then I'm looking for good decision making. And for my particular cases, I've laid it out into steps of the steps I think they should go through to make a good decision. Once again, I'm more structured than a lot of other case analyses. So look at other people's prompts when applying these ideas to other professors. But my first section is just a quick summary of the important facts from the case. If you don't know the facts, it's pretty hard to make a decision, right? Or you know the wrong, you're focusing on unimportant facts, it's hard to make a good decision. The second part is stating what is the main issue I'm trying to resolve here. That focuses people's attention on what is my decision about. The next part is the thing I've talked the most about, which is the idea of applying the concepts to the case. And this is where I tell them, pick the concepts you want to use, the ones you think are most relevant. I'll even tell them, like, some cases, there's concepts you have to use. Like on that one I just told you, like una mano, if they don't use the concept of mission statement, and the title of the case is got mission in it, they will lose points because I'm like, that concept is just too important for this decision to leave out. But saying, pick two or three is usually a good number. So you just based on the length of my cases, really. It's like you gotta have few enough about them that you can use the details. If you just use the definition and move on to the next, you're not getting into those details that I mentioned earlier. So you're understanding the case better by applying concepts is what that third section is. So the first section, summarize the facts. Second section, focus yourself on the question you're trying to answer. Third section, and this is like definitely one of the more important sections, understand the case more deeply by using the concepts from class. And at that point, you still shouldn't have made your decision. You're just trying to figure out, how do these concepts from class let me know more about the decision I need to make? The next section, the second to last, I call the possible solutions section, is where they're supposed to be listing out, what are the different things I could do here? What could the different decisions could I make here? And then I'm asking like a major pro and con of each, just quick hits. Because once again, you shouldn't make your decisions until you kind of thought of what is it that we could do. Most cases, especially the dilemma kind that I mostly use, but this would be true for other cases and other professors, will have two or more proposed solutions or possible solutions in it, because there'll be different characters in the case that are saying, I think we should do this. And somebody else will say, I think we should do this. And so like one of the things I say to students when they're doing that possible solutions section is, please make sure you include all the things that people already mentioned in the case. Because if you leave out something that somebody already mentioned, they're going to be like, what the hell? You didn't even think of my thing. Like, why should I listen to you? I already know better than you, right? So listing up those possibilities you can come up with. And then the last section, which is probably the most important, is an actual proposal. Like, this is what I think we should do. Going back to Una Mano, I think we should just not open an office in Miami and just keep doing what we've been doing. We've been really successful with it. So first of all, you got to be really clear. This is what I think we should do. That goes back to that business writing. Sometimes people waffle there and you can't figure out what it is exactly that they think you should be doing. So really clear, this is what I think we should do. And then obviously you want to back it up. So you back it up with facts from the case and the understanding you gained in the section where you were applying the concepts. So it could be like, if we go against a mission statement, we know that companies that go along with the mission statement, follow it, tend to do better. So we want to make sure that we're going along with our mission statement. So you're backing up your decision using those details that came up in the analysis section. So we should not open in Miami because that would go against our mission statement. Companies that go against our mission statement tend to perform less well. So you should be backing it up with those things. And because we don't discuss everything in class, and this is true of any case assignment, not just mine, that's relevant, they'll probably want to back it up with other facts as well, right? Like, we just didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about whatever cultural differences in Central America versus Miami, but they're relevant. So if people know about that, they'll add them in, and that's good, right? It brings more information. But for the class itself, it's important to use concepts from class, because that's the whole point of the assignment. Remember, is to like understand the concepts from class better by, using them in a realistic situation. And so I just went through all that under the heading of decision making. So I'm looking for following a good decision-making process where you're not making up your mind before you have the facts, not having only one solution, and not even considering what other things could be done, things like that. And then the last one, again, is the good use of concepts, which I started out with, so I won't talk about that too much. Just to re-emphasize that idea that it's really important, and not just for my class, to use the details. It's really easy for a student to just like look up the definition of the concept, say that, and then move on. But there's probably been, if it's a big enough concept to be in a textbook, there's probably been 1,000 academic studies on it, that concept, finding out a lot of information about how it works. And so you want to use some of that information, at least whatever made it into lecture and the textbook, to make your argument stronger and your understanding stronger. But I'm going to stop again and ask for questions, like talking a lot. Yes, Elizabeth.
So you mentioned, previous studies done in the textbook. If a student is writing this and do you want them to cite the textbook if they're talking about previous studies done?
So this is a place where professors in MVS vary a lot. What I say in the cases is if you're citing the case itself, I mean, if you're using information in the case itself, you don't have to cite it. But if you're using other information, you have to tell me where you got it. But I don't ask for like good citation style. I just like, you said in class is good enough,
Okay.
But a lot of other professors would be like, I want APA. Usually it's APA in business. Um, um, but usually I'm like, I don't ask them to cite the case because they'd be citing like every sentence almost. It'd be ridiculous. But a lot of time they'll just say like your slides from module 2 or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? And I give them such a hard time about grammar that I don't want them to be worrying about the specifics of citation technique. I want it. Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Is there any like common mistakes that you see in a case analysis that you like want us to be like very like vigilant about?
There's a bunch. That's a good question. I will talk about that for the next 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
So the biggest, most important one that you could probably guess, if I said like take 3 minutes to guess what the first and most important would be, is not understanding the concepts well enough. So I gave the example of sometimes concept names sound different than what they really are, and just going by what it sounds like. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I just said about just using the definition, not looking at the details. Sometimes they just use them completely incorrectly. Like somehow they get the wires crossed, and they think maybe they used ChatGPT and it told them something wrong. Maybe they just confused it with something that they heard in some other class. Sometimes it's just wrong. So the most fatal mistake to make is not understand the concepts well enough. I mean, sometimes they just haven't thought about them enough. Like they read it, but they just read it rotely and didn't think about what it actually means, right? So that's the worst one, because if you're trying to do assignment that is supposed to help you understand the concepts deeper and you never understood the concept in the first place, you haven't made it off first base, right? So that's the worst one. Related to that is just not being able to apply them confidently. Like they understand what it means, but they have trouble translating it into the real world. And a couple of things that help with that is, first of all, coming to class, because there's a lot of examples in class. So the people who have the most trouble with that tend to be the ones who skip class a lot. Also look back at the slides. The slides often have examples. Look back at the textbook. The textbook often has examples. And slowing down, I think. Well, I think a lot of times they get panicked and don't spend enough time thinking about the concept to understand how to apply it. So one of the things I do in my class, but not everybody does this, so mileage will vary, is I give them extension for coming to you guys, which means that then they've got 2 more days, so they just got time. So they do have time to think about it. So like if you're reading, it's not your job to know what the concept means, but if you can't figure out what the concept means from what they've written, that's probably a red flag. And if it doesn't make sense of how it applies to the situation in your mind, that's another big red flag. Yeah, so
I was just going to say there's a student who wrote, Emma wrote, so if a point the student is trying to make isn't clear, the best place to start would be reviewing the concepts from the class. It was just a question.
yeah, I see that.
And I have a thought about that, and I know you do too. From the perspective of the Writing and Multi-Literacy Center, Emma, I would say that your job, as you know, Dr. Koopa has mentioned, I mean, your job is not to know these concepts, but you know, it's very clear when the student doesn't understand them. And one of the things that you want to do is, like in a tutorial session, is ask them questions about it. It's like, so tell me about it. How did you apply it? What do you know, you're asking them to think it through. Maybe they haven't thought it through sufficiently. So just having a dialogue, and they should be telling you what they think about it and how to articulate it and draw out those details to put into the paper, right? If they cannot do that, even after, you know, you trying to kind of get them to talk more about it, then I would say, like, well, let's look at the slideshows. Like, what does it say? And what do you think it says, right? So you ought not to be telling them because you're not in the class, but you can certainly kind of direct them to the slides or, you know, resources, and maybe help the student just take a look at it, ask the student what they think about what that means, and then figure out, you know, how they may want to apply that, right? I'm sure, I don't know if anybody here has used or worked with any of the students in Dr. Cooper's class. Did he? Oh, some of you have, right? Oh, so Jessica. So I'm sure you you had instances where the students are not really applying those concepts very well. What did you do?
For the most part, because I'm not a business major or management major, or have ever taken those classes, I'll ask like, so what does that actually mean? Tell me in your own words. How would you apply it? I just keep on asking questions. It becomes, like you said, it becomes into a conversation, and they'll be like, oh, I should write that down. Or I'll be like, hey, you should actually write that down. That sounds amazing.
Excellent. That's so good, because some of them do know the concepts, but didn't get it onto paper. And some people didn't know the concepts. Somebody just put up a comment. Yes. So Fady, is that how you say your name?
Yes.
He asked, you know, should it be clear enough to a general audience? Yes, 100%. That's part of this business writing being clear. I actually tell students sometimes, explain it in a way that your little sister would understand it, or your cousin who dropped out of high school would understand it. You know, explain it that way. Because if they can, these ideas aren't that complicated, really. So if you can explain it with simple words, then everybody's going to understand what you mean. Yeah, so that is, and that was maybe one of the next biggest things is what, so he was just talking about, is them having ideas in their head that didn't make it to the paper. And so like, I can't tell if they know whether or not they understand the concept because they didn't write enough of it down. So those are I mean, so he said of getting them to talk through it, that's gold. That's gold. I mean, the only thing is you got your time limits, right? But besides that, I mean, you could probably sit there 2 hours with some of these students, and at the end they'd have a good paper. In the beginning, they had nothing. So so using the concepts well is the number one thing. Another thing that is common, it's less of a big problem, it's still a problem, but it's common, is just want to retell the story. Instead of analyzing the story, they want to tell the story. And so I always tell them, I already know the story. I read it. I already know the story. And so actually that is why I initially put in that first section of where I'm saying just a summary of the most important facts, was so that they'd have a place to put the story. Because when I didn't have that section, they'd be putting it everywhere. And so I'd say, just put it at the beginning, that's the place for it. So if you're reading through it and it seems like they're not actually adding anything beyond what's in the story, they're just adding pieces of the story back in, that's also a red flag of maybe you're not using your concepts enough to dig down into the details. See if you can move these pieces of the story that you think are most important up to the beginning. You're still going to use facts from the story throughout the thing. Like, it's important that they want to go to Miami and Miami's in the US. I mean, that's an important fact. You can't just put it at the beginning. But when they just get into like telling the story thing, that's rather than analyzing, that's not helping. Related to that, and this is, I think, something that would be really good if you guys can catch, but it requires having read the case carefully, which will only probably happen if you're an embedded tutor for a class with cases, is getting facts wrong. So with the Unamano story, there's probably about 10 facts that people just get wrong. And most people get it right, it'll just be like every semester one person gets it wrong. But if somebody's got like 3 facts wrong, like in that beginning section, they obviously did not read the story very well. And usually the rest of it's going to include a bunch of made up stuff as well about the concepts, about whatever. So if you see wrong facts from the case, you gotta like be like, all right, show me where this is in the case. Because sometimes I think something's wrong and I do a bunch of Googling, and not Googling, a bunch of control Fing in the document, and I find it. I'm like, oh no, they're right, sweet. But a lot of times it's just wrong. At which point you'd be like, if that's not in the case and you think it is, what else do you think is in the case that's not there? And what's there that you don't think is there? You got to sit down and read it again with a piece of paper and write down the important facts as you go through it. And that's probably something that's going to take longer than you can have them do in your section. I mean, in your meeting, but maybe you can have them do it for one pair. I don't know. So we'll give you better tips on how to deal with that. But people who get facts wrong tend to do a really bad case because they're starting from the wrong place. Related to that, sometimes like real important facts get left out. That's a little bit more of a judgment call. But like in the Unamano case, there's someone who said that they'll give them, I forget now, it's either $2 or $4 million if they open an office in Miami. And so when you're talking about pros and cons, it seems like $2 million donation is important enough to get mentioned. And once again, if somebody's not mentioning that, it's probably because they didn't read the case closely enough to know about it. And so, yeah, if you can see just issues of like reading comprehension and just kind of make it clear to them that, they need to probably read again and take notes while they're doing it. Another big problem, so none of these happen, the ones with the concepts happen all the time. All these other ones are like, maybe 5 people in the class of 35 or less. But one that comes a lot is someone who's just argued for one solution from the very beginning. Like, they read the case, they were halfway through it, and they already knew what the answer was without having thought about it. And then they write their analysis that way. And that goes really against the second thing I'm looking for, which is the idea of good decision process. And so if you're like reading the if the question is, if they've decided the question is, why is it a good idea for them to move to Miami? They've already decided the answer before they even decided what the question is. And so if you see that, you should be flagging it and being like, make sure you're walking through the good decision processes where you're looking at all sides before you come to and you can still come to the same conclusion. So people who do that usually fake it and then just come to the same conclusion at the end anyway. But at least they've got that information in there for somebody else who's reading it. And so the place you see this the most is in the conceptual analysis, where they're applying the concepts, but they're applying every concept to support one answer. And you could, and like, you shouldn't know whether the concept supports more than one answer because you're not in my class, but you can ask if it looks suspicious, like everything they say is all supporting one answer. You can be like, well, is there any details of these concepts that make it sound like you might be good to do something else? And if they really don't think there is, well, then they don't think there is. But usually there is. Pretty much always there is. You can say the professor said that there's always details that support both sides. So that's a big one. And then I guess the last one of these things that I'll mention that I've mentioned before is just the writing itself is too confusing. I just can't figure out what they mean. Usually that's coupled with bad grammar that makes it all that much more complicated. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they've got good grammar and it's just, you can't figure out what the hell they mean. And so like, it's really hard to get points on a rubric because most of us, when we're grading these cases, have rubrics. If you can't even figure out like which column of the rubric you're in or which row of the rubric you're in because you can't figure out what the argument is. And so if that's the case, you're almost definitely going to need to get them to come back again because I just don't think you can help them. And this is something you should talk to Sohi about. In my own classes, I would be totally open to if say I had an embedded tutor or somebody else in the WMC reached out to me and said like, this person's, analysis is so confusing, I can't make sense of it. Would you give them an extension so I can work with them more? I would say yes. But you guys should figure out what that looks like internally before saying you're going to do something like that. But like, because those are the worst. If you get an assignment that makes no sense, it's just like, what am I supposed to even do? So those are the big things I see. Yeah, I talked for 53 minutes already. Damn. Oh no, I started 5 minutes late. Almost 53 minutes. Do you have questions, comments, concerns? You guys had good comments there. Oh, there's 3 things in the chat I haven't even seen yet. Okay, yeah, I did see them. You had good questions so far. Do you have other questions?
I have one question.
Yeah.
So I've been wondering if, say, if a student got like a fact wrong about a case or something, and I suspect he got a fact wrong from like the reading comprehension, would I be in any way expected to kind of look over the case with them?
So here you can answer that.
Okay, so say that again, Fadi. You're saying that if they seem confused,
Hmm.
would you want to look over the case?
Oh no, would I
Again?
be expected to?
You
Not-
mean
not
the
something that I
actual
want.
the case itself before you're looking at their paper?
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
if like if say the case is lined up in a way that just shows like just like the facts in like one section,
Yeah.
would
Yeah,
I?
so I would do that for sure because actually the case is not that long.
Mhm.
You could easily read it. You can easily read it. And I've I've read it many times. And sometimes it's helpful. It's like, seriously, let's read it together and let's see what what are you getting out of it? Because it doesn't seem, especially if it's very confusing. And you're not able to follow. And when you ask them to explain, they're like, oh, I'm not really clear. I don't know. So they're kind of confused about what they're reading themselves. And you're going to have to break it down. And so you could work with them to kind of think about like, what are, as you're looking at, the sections of that case study, maybe it's that. It could also be like maybe they don't fully understand what the assignment is too, right? So we always look at the assignment, but the case study itself is not that long. You can certainly, and I've often sometimes also when I see things that are confusing, even like not this class but other classes, where the summary just doesn't make any sense or the analysis doesn't make any sense, I ask the student, let's look at the original source. Let's look at it together, because I'm not really sure what you're trying to do. And when I ask them to explain it, they're not really clear. We look at the original, and when we look at the original, I can see where the breakdown is happening.
I want to throw something in
yeah,
about the business cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes they use vocabulary that is a little businessy and people might not know it. So sometimes you have to Google, what does this word actually mean? Or copy and paste a sentence in the chat GPT and explain it to me like I'm 5, something like that. Because if I think of it, I'll be like, oh, this is what this means, but I do not catch all of those. And there's definitely words in there that I know if people don't look them up, they're not gonna know what they mean. So you can help with that as well.
All right, thank you.
Jessica?
Sorry, piggybacking from what Fadi said, if the pages or if the study that we're reading is like super long, or are we expected to read it with them, or do we just normally just have, oh, read it back, or just like a section of it? What would you recommend?
Some cases will be really long. I mean, not from my Management 307 class, but like if my MBA class comes in, I haven't picked the cases yet, but I'm thinking they're going to be about 10 to 14 pages long. So obviously you can't read all that in the meeting with them. But I don't know what the best practice would be.
I think it's going to be hard to say. I think it depends. But like with all things, like if someone came in with a paper that was super long, you're not going to be able to look at all of it, right? So you're going to have to kind of work with a student to negotiate, given the time constraints, like you have 30 minutes, what's their priority? What do you think is absolutely, this is what we need to do? And you could recommend certain things and the student might want to do something. And then you guys gonna have to work on, okay, why don't we, maybe it's at a state where they just are so confused that you really do have to look back at it. Maybe you can choose a section just to see how they understand it. Just like the beginning, maybe even the intro, just to see where they are at. And then you can kind of go from there. And you can make a judgment call on whether or not, they're having more trouble. And perhaps they need to go back to, maybe may have a meeting with Dr. Cooper or whoever it is to figure out what's going on with that, right? And also you can set up another appointment as well. You can just ask them, hey, maybe you should come back or meet with another tutor to kind of go through this a little bit. But if it's really content based, then it's like theoretical, like they don't really understand the concepts very well. They should probably go back to the professor and ask for a little bit more help or support or other resources, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And Leah just mentioned we have LRC tutors for business.
Or no, do we have? It's a question.
Do we have?
I
We
don't
sometimes
know.
do, but mostly
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we tend to have it for things like accounting or economics, where it's like just sort of clear facts. The rest of business tends to be so squishy that it's hard to have tutors. One thing I want to mention real quick is do not give them a sense that they're going to get an A, because they're going to blame you. Even if you have no idea what the concepts are, and they know that you have no idea what the concepts are, they're still going to blame you if if you say it's good and they don't get the grade that they interpreted good to mean. So like, just be careful about what you say. Even though like it won't be your fault, they will blame you. It happens regularly. So just be careful of that.
Thank you. I have to go to the next meeting.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan Cooper. Thank you. That was
Thank you,
really
Sally.
great. I loved it. I'm sorry I came in a little bit late, but I really enjoyed it. And a lot of what your assignment is requiring them to do is it's the critical thinking, the decision-making part that you mentioned. It reminds me of a story that assignment that I used to give to students where you could do a lot of different things. You can go so many different ways. And it's just really about how are you thinking through it and then kind of making a case, an argument for it and applying, as you say, right? So,
Right.
so that's really great. Thank you.
Thanks. Excellent.
All
Good to
right.
meet you
Bye-bye.
all. I'm gonna run because I got another thing as well.
All right. Take care.
Good to see you. Bye.